Wyoming Territory. Autumn of 1879, the wind came down off the Laramie Range sharp as broken glass, and Hannah Hargrove pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped off the stagecoach into the dust-blown town of Bitter Creek. The driver handed her a worn carpetbag and tipped his hat without a word. Dust clung to her skirts, and her hands trembled from the long ride and the uncertainty ahead. She had nothing left to return to in Kansas. What little family she had was gone, and with the scar that ran across her left cheekbone a jagged reminder of a fire that had nearly taken her life, she had no illusions about her place in the world. She had been told more than once by men with pity in their eyes and women with whispers behind their fans, "No man will ever want you, not like that." She believed them. Bitter Creek was barely more than a rail stop and a saloon, but it was where her late uncle had owned a small dry goods store. The letter she had received 2 months ago said it was hers now, though the man who wrote it warned her debts might swallow it whole. She squared her shoulders and walked through the fading light, past the saloon's swinging door and the scent of whiskey and sweat, to the store on the corner. The wooden sign hung crooked and one of the front windows had been cracked in. Inside, shelves stood half empty and dust lay thick on the counter. A tall boy stood near the back, maybe 8 or 9, his hands deep in a crate of canned peaches. A girl, just a few years older, sat on the floor with her knees drawn up to her chest, staring at Hannah with wide, guarded eyes. "Who are you?" the girl asked. "I might ask you the same," Hannah said softly. Lowering her bag, the boy straightened, his eyes filled with fear. "We ain't stealing." Hannah's voice stayed steady. "I did not say you were." The girl stood slowly. "We used to help Mr. Hargrove. He let us sleep in the back sometimes. Then he got sick and—" Her voice trailed off and she looked down. Hannah stepped closer. "What are your names?" "I'm Daisy. He's Duke." Hannah glanced around the dim store. "You two have no one." Daisy shook her head. "Folks in town do not want us, said we are too much trouble." Hannah understood that kind of rejection. She knelt down in front of them. "Well, I suppose this place needs a lot of work. I cannot do it alone." Daisy's eyes narrowed. "You mean, we can stay? If you help me keep it running, you have a roof and food. Deal?" Duke nodded quickly. "Deal." They were not hers by blood, but as the door creaked shut behind them and the wind howled outside, they felt like hers in a way that mattered more. A week later, the store was livable, if not thriving. Hannah had cleaned out the shelves, inventoried what little was left, and started writing to suppliers. She took in laundry on the side, stitched shirts for the ranch hands in town, and mended boots when asked. Still, she could feel the stares when she walked down the street. Her scar drew attention, and her sudden appearance with 2 children only fed the gossip. On a cold Tuesday morning, as she tried to lift a barrel of flour onto the back porch, her grip faltered and the barrel tipped, rolling toward the edge. A hand caught it mid-fall. "Careful now," a deep voice said. She turned to see a man at least a head taller than her, with broad shoulders under a worn duster and dark hair curling just beneath his hat. His eyes were gray-blue, sharp and clear. "Thank you," she said, brushing her hands on her apron. He set the barrel upright. "You need a hand with the rest." "I can manage," she said, firm but polite. He nodded. "Name's Elias North. Heard the store changed hands. You must be Hannah." She hesitated. "I am. I work cattle up at the Nelson Ranch. Come in twice a month, sometimes more. Just wanted to say welcome." Hannah gave a small nod. "Thank you." He tipped his hat, started to walk off, then paused. "If those children are yours, you raised them strong. Saw the boy helping unload feed at the stables yesterday." Her breath caught slightly. "They are not mine, but I suppose that does not matter much now." He gave her one long look, not of pity, just steady, quiet understanding. Sometimes the people we choose matter more than the ones we are born to. She watched him walk away down the street, his boots thudding soft against the dirt. Something in her chest shifted. Elias came back a few days later, bringing a sack of dried beans and a coil of rope. Daisy served him coffee while Duke showed off a slingshot he had carved. That evening, Hannah stood on the porch watching the children play under the last stretch of daylight. Elias leaned against the post beside her. "You took them in when no one else would," he said. "I needed them as much as they needed me." He nodded. "You are braver than most," she scoffed lightly. "No, just tired of running." He looked at her then, really looked. I know something about that. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was easy. Like they had known each other longer than they had, winter came early to Bitter Creek. The store made just enough to cover flour and kindling. Elias kept showing up bringing extra firewood, fixing the broken latch on the door, teaching Duke how to saddle a pony. One night, after the children had gone to bed, Hannah sat by the fire, mending a torn glove. Elias handed her a mug of warm cider and sat down beside her. "You never ask for help," he said. "I have learned not to expect it." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Someone hurt you bad," she swallowed. "Yes. Someone made you think you are not worth loving, that you are too broken, too scarred." Her eyes burned, but she held them steady on the flame. "Yes." Then he turned to her, voice low but sure. "They were wrong." She looked at him and for once did not look away. His hand brushed hers. "I will take you forever if you will have me." Tears slipped soundlessly down her cheeks. No one had ever said that to her, not like that, not without condition. "You do not have to say anything now," Elias added, "but I needed you to know." Hannah reached over and took his hand in both of hers. "I have spent so long thinking no one ever would," she said, "but I want you, I do." He pulled her into his arms, and she let herself go into the warmth of him, into the truth of his words, into the quiet, steady love growing between them. For the first time in a long time, she believed she could be wanted. And for the first time ever, she believed she could be loved. The first morning after Hannah said yes, frost had silvered the edge of the window panes and the sky was the soft, pale blue of late November. She stood at the stove, sleeves rolled to her elbows, stirring cornmeal into a pot with the kind of quiet purpose she'd once thought had left her. Elias sat at the table nearby, his coat draped across the back of the chair, boots clean from the night before. "I never expected to find a place that felt like it might hold," he said, rubbing the edge of his jaw with the kind of absent motion a man made when he was thinking too hard. "You mean the town or this kitchen?" she asked, not looking up. He leaned back a little. "Both, I suppose." She ladled corn mush into bowls and set them on the table. Daisy and Duke were still asleep upstairs, the hush of the hour broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock. "You ever think about leaving?" Elias asked after a beat. "I did," she said, folding herself into the chair across from him. "But the leaving always came with nowhere to go, and now—" Her voice trailed off. She didn't need to finish it. He reached across and rested his hand over hers, warm and rough from rope and reins. They ate in companionable silence until the children came down. Duke's hair stuck up on one side, and Daisy had the look of someone who'd slept with a book under her pillow. Elias slid his chair back and helped set out dried apple slices and molasses for the corn mush, not because anyone asked him to, but because he had begun to do small things without prompting. Later that day, Mr. Avery, the freight man, came by with a delivery. He brought bolts of muslin, 4 tins of coffee, and a crate of lamp wicks. Hannah signed the ledger, then frowned at the crate. "I didn't order this much. Paid for already," Mr. Avery said. "From someone up at the Nelson spread, didn't say who, just said it was for the store." After he rode off, she looked at Elias, who was stacking kindling near the stove. "You didn't have to, I know. You can't keep doing that. I can, and I will." She didn't argue. She just opened the crate and began sorting the goods, his presence a quiet weight beside her. That evening, after the store had closed and supper was finished, Elias brought in 2 lengths of wood he'd planed smooth and set them on the counter. "Thought you could use shelves back there, for stock or whatever you need." She looked at the boards, then at him. "How do you always know what's needed before I say anything?" He shrugged. "You say more than you think." She watched him measure the wall, his fingers stained with pine resin from working on the ranch all day, and something in her softened further. When the children had gone to bed and the fire burned low, she stepped out onto the back stoop, shawl around her shoulders. Elias followed, the stars bright above them, the wind quiet for once. "You sure about this?" she asked, voice low. He didn't hesitate. "I've never been surer of anything." She looked up at him, at the scar just above his left brow, the one that hadn't faded with time. "I don't come without weight." He reached for her hand, and when she let him take it, he held it loosely, gently. "That's the thing about you, Hannah. You carry your weight with grace. I don't mind the carrying, just don't shut me out from it." She leaned into him then, her head resting beneath his chin. He wrapped his arms around her, and they stood like that for a long stretch of silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Inside, the children turned in their sleep. Outside, the world held still for a moment, as if it, too, was listening. By the time the moon rose over Bitter Creek, the shelves had been built, the hearth swept, and two people who had once been strangers stood side by side, no longer waiting to be chosen, but choosing each other. The first snow came soft and early, blanketing Bitter Creek in white by the second week of December. The town quieted under it, sounds dulled, movement slower. At the store, Hannah kept the stove burning high, and Duke spent most days chopping kindling under Elias's watch. Daisy had taken to copying invoices with firm, careful handwriting, her tongue poking out the corner of her mouth as she concentrated. One morning, the bell over the door rang and brought in a woman Hannah hadn't seen before. She wore a wool cloak of fine weave, the hem damp with snow, and her gloves were stitched with blue thread. "You're Miss Hargrove?" the woman asked. "I am." The woman opened a ledger and handed over a folded note. "I'm here on behalf of the county board. They're appointing a school teacher come spring. The man who ran the last one moved on with the railroad." Hannah read the paper twice. "They're asking me to help coordinate the building repairs. You're the only woman in the county with a running business and a clean ledger," the woman said, voice flat. "You don't have to teach, just make sure the place is standing come March." Hannah folded the note and tucked it into her apron. "I'll do it." After the woman left, Elias came out from the back room where he'd been sorting crates. "What was that?" "They want me to oversee the schoolhouse repairs." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Will you?" She nodded once. "It's time someone did." That night, after she'd gone over the schoolhouse list twice and Daisy had fallen asleep with her boots still on, Hannah stepped outside. The cold bit through her shawl, but she stood still on the porch, watching snow fall off the eaves in slow, soft clumps. Elias joined her, a tin mug in his hand. "You're thinking too loud. I don't know the first thing about shingles or slate. You'll learn. I've always been watched for what I wasn't. Then let them watch you for what you are." She looked over at him, his face half lit by the lantern behind the window. "You make it sound easier than it feels." "I don't. I just know what you're made of." The wind shifted, scattering snow across the porch. Hannah stepped toward him. "What are you made of, Elias?" He glanced out at the quiet street. 20 years and not a place to call home." "I rode fence from Missouri to Utah, followed cattle, broke horses. Never thought I'd stop long enough to look a woman in the eye and think this is it." She searched his face, found no jest there. "You believe in it now?" He looked at her, steady. "I believe in you." When she reached for his hand, he didn't hesitate. They stood there as snow fell around them, the kind that would stick through morning. By week's end, Elias had drawn up plans for the schoolhouse repairs, and townsfolk began to offer help in quiet ways. Mr. Callow at the livery brought over extra nails. Widow Lemmer offered her eldest boy to help haul lumber. Hannah didn't ask for any of it. They came anyway. One afternoon, as she and Elias worked side by side clearing out broken timbers from the school roof, she paused, leaning on her hammer. "How did you know you wanted this?" He didn't look up from where he was fitting a board. "Because I stopped looking over my shoulder." She watched him a moment. "I used to brace myself every time someone looked at me too long. Think they were wondering how I'd come out of that fire still walking." He set the board down and stood. "You came out of it walking, working, raising two young ones who weren't yours. I don't see a scar when I look at you. I see a woman who got back up." Her throat tightened, but she didn't let the tears fall. She just nodded, picked up her hammer again, and kept working. By Christmas, the schoolhouse had a roof again. The windows had been reglazed, the stove rebricked. The county sent word they'd be sending desks on the next rail car. That night, Elias brought over a wooden box wrapped in a square of calico. Hannah unwrapped it in the warm light of the hearth. Inside lay a carved brooch, smooth walnut shaped into a small wild rose, polished to a satin sheen. "I made it for you," he said, "with my own hands." She turned it over in her palm. "It's beautiful. I figured it ought to be. It's for the woman I plan to marry." The words settled into the room like the last piece of a puzzle. She looked up at him. You still want that? I want nothing else. She rose, stepped into him, and rested her forehead against his chest. Then yes, I'll marry you. He pulled her close. No fanfare, no applause. Just the warmth of his arms and the sound of the fire and the knowing between them that they'd made a life here, one day at a time. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, everything had begun to bloom. January came hard, with wind that rattled the shutters and a cold that settled deep in the joints. The sun rose late and pale, casting long shadows across bitter creeks, frost-hardened streets. Hannah stood behind the store counter, ledger open, pencil in hand, calculating how many sacks of flour she'd need to order before the next supply wagon came through. She'd taken to wearing Elias's old wool vest over her dress when the stove couldn't quite chase off the morning chill. Outside, horse hooves clopped slow against the frozen earth. The door creaked open, letting in a burst of cold and the smell of rawhide and pine pitch. Elias stepped in, brushing snow from his shoulders. Rail car came in last night, he said, setting down a narrow crate. Desks for the schoolhouse, she closed the ledger. That early, they were ahead of schedule, surprised the whole town. He rubbed his hands together, warming them near the stove. I brought a crowbar, thought we could unpack them this afternoon. She nodded once, then tilted her head. You look like you've got more to say than that. He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of parchment, came with the shipment. He handed it over. It's from the board, official appointment. She opened it carefully. The ink was dark, the letters clean. Her name sat in bold script under the heading, School Matron and Local Administrator. She read it twice. They're trusting me with it, she said, voice quiet. They are, Elias said, and they should. She traced her name with her fingers. I never thought I'd be the one to open a schoolhouse, not with the way folks used to look at me. Elias leaned close, his voice low. Maybe they weren't looking hard enough. She folded the paper and tucked it away, then turned toward the back room. I'll get my coat. At the schoolhouse, the snow had been shoveled in neat rows off the steps, likely by one of the Nelson boys. Inside, dust still hung in the corners, but the windows were clear, and the stove gave off a good heat. The crates lined the wall like soldiers, each marked with the county seal. Elias pried one open while Hannah unwrapped the cloth bundles nestled inside small desks, walnut-stained, each one built for a child's size. She ran her hand across the smooth top of one, the smell of fresh cut wood curling up from the grain. These'll last a generation, she said. They'll need to, Elias replied, lifting the next bundle. I heard talk of families moving in come spring. Railroads bringing more than freight these days. She brushed sawdust from her palms. We'll need books then, slates, chalk. I'll ride into Cheyenne in 2 weeks, he said. Can see about ordering some. She looked up sharply. That's near a week's ride in this cold, he met her gaze. I've ridden through worse. Besides, it's not just about the school. What else then? He stepped closer, the lines around his eyes softening. I want to file for a small plot, just west of the creek bend, good soil sheltered from wind, her breath caught. You mean to build, I do, a house. For us? For a moment all she could do was stare at him, the man who had walked into her life like a quiet storm, steady and sure. You've already decided. I have. He reached into his coat again and pulled out a folded sketch. I drew this up last time I was out at the line shack. She unfolded it slowly. The drawing was simple: 2 rooms, a stove, a porch, a garden patch marked in the back, a corral along the side. Her throat tightened. You want us there? All of us? I wouldn't build it otherwise. She pressed the paper to her chest. Then I'll help you raise the walls. They unpacked the rest of the desks in silence, but it was a silence full of something warmer than words. When they stepped outside, the sky had cleared, and the sun shone off the snow in a way that made everything brighter. Back at the store, Daisy was peeling potatoes by the stove, humming under her breath. Duke sat on the floor with a piece of wood and a dull knife, carving something with the kind of focus only children could summon. Elias crouched beside him. What's that going to be? A whistle, Duke said without looking up. For when we start school so I can call everyone in. Hannah smiled. Seems you've already given yourself a job, Duke glanced up. Somebody's got to. That night, after the children had gone to bed and the fire had burned down to embers, Hannah sat with Elias at the kitchen table. The lamp cast a soft glow over his face, and the shadows beneath his brow deepened as he read over the supply list she'd written for Cheyenne. She studied the way his hand rested beside hers, the way his thumb traced the grain of the table without thinking. "I didn't believe this was possible," she said. "What part?" "All of it, the store, the school, you." He looked up then, his eyes steady. "That's the difference between surviving and living." She reached for him, her fingers curling around his. "I want to keep building this life with you. Every piece of it." "Then we will," he said. Board by board, day by day, in the hush between them, something settled deeper than a promise, stronger than a vow. It was the quiet certainty of two people who had come through fire and frost and found in each other something worth holding on to. Outside, the land slept under snow, but inside, the future had already begun. The thaw came slow. By early March, the creek behind the store ran high and fast, swollen from snowmelt, and the air carried the faint scent of wet earth and pine. Hannah stood by the schoolhouse door, watching the last of the children file in. Daisy had woven a length of ribbon into her braid that morning, and Duke had tucked a pebble into his vest pocket, whispering that it would keep him from forgetting his letters. Inside, the desks bore the scuffs of real use now, and the slate board hung square on the wall. The teacher had arrived from Laramie 2 days earlier, a soft-spoken man with ink stains on his cuffs and a talent for keeping order without raising his voice. His name was Mr. Grafton, and he'd taken to Duke's questions with patience and to Daisy's neat handwriting with quiet praise. Hannah closed the door behind the last child and turned back toward the store. Elias waited in the wagon, reins slack in his hands, a crate of nails and 2 sacks of seed at his feet. "You sure you want oats?" he asked as she climbed in beside him. "Barley would keep better, I'm sure. Oats grow quick, and I want something green at our table by June." He gave a small nod and flicked the reins. The wagon eased forward, wheels creaking as they headed west down the rutted trail that followed the creek bend. The land opened wide there, sloping gradual toward a grove of box elder and cottonwood. The house frame stood against the sky, beams raised, roof half-shingled, the porch already catching morning light. They worked the rest of the day side by side, hammering siding until their arms ached. Elias climbed the ladder to fix the eaves while Hannah dug the first shallow rows for the kitchen garden. She paused once, pressing her palm to the soil. It was dark and damp and ready. As the sun dipped low, Elias came down the ladder, wiping sweat from his brow with the edge of his sleeve. "We'll have a roof by week's end." She stood, brushing her hands clean, "and walls to keep the spring wind out." He looked toward the horizon, where the mountains glowed gold behind the last of the cloud cover. "I've been thinking about the porch. What about it? I want to build the bench wide enough for 2, thought maybe we'd sit there come evenings. I'd like that." He turned to her then, his expression open in a way she'd only come to recognize in the quiet hours. "When I left Missouri, I didn't think I'd put down roots, didn't think I could, but this life with you, it's more than I ever counted on." She stepped close, the scent of sawdust and early grass between them. "I know what it is not to be wanted, I know what it is to be looked at and never seen. But you've never looked away." He reached for her hand, dust and sweat and all. "You are more than I ever hoped for." She leaned into him, no hesitation, her head resting against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, steady as timber, sure as spring thaw. By the time they hitched the team and headed back toward town, the stars had begun to show, silver pricks against a darkening sky. 2 weeks later, the house stood finished. Daisy painted the porch posts while Duke scattered seeds into the garden rows with the solemnity of a preacher. The townsfolk came with pies and loaves wrapped in cloth, offering handshakes and quiet nods. No one asked about scars. No one wondered why a woman who'd once been alone now wasn't. They saw what had been built brick by brick, moment by moment, and they respected it. On a bright Sunday morning, under a sky clear as polished glass, Hannah and Elias stood before Reverend Trell at the edge of the creek. The children stood beside them, Daisy in a blue dress, Duke in a too-big vest with a wildflower pinned to the lapel. The ceremony was short, spoken in plain words, the kind that held weight because they didn't try to dress up what didn't need it. When Elias took Hannah's hand, he didn't look at the crowd. He looked only at her. "I'll walk beside you," he said, voice low but sure. "No matter the season, no matter the sky." "And I'll walk with you," she replied, "wherever the road turns." They kissed beneath the cottonwoods with the wind stirring the branches overhead and the children grinning behind them. It wasn't grand, but it was whole, real, lasting. That evening they sat on the porch bench Elias had built wide, Hannah's head on his shoulder, her hand resting over his heart. Inside, Daisy read aloud from the one book she'd brought from her old life, her voice steady. Duke had already fallen asleep with the dog at his feet, a half-carved whistle still in his hand. "You ever think we'd end up here?" Elias asked, his thumb tracing the back of her hand. "No," she whispered. "But I've never been more glad to be wrong." The moon rose slow over the ridge, casting silver across the garden rows and the field beyond. They sat there until the lantern inside burned low, until the night curled soft around them. And when they went in at last, closing the door behind them, they did so together whole, weathered, and finally home.